To better your best and your world, you need to dig deep and grow. Join us as top experts, leaders, and creators uncover powerful insights to help you grow in life and in work. And now, your host, Michael McAvoy. Welcome, everybody, and here we are with another episode of Dig Deep Grow, the show dedicated to helping you better your best and your world. Now, today we're going to be talking about the life of the king of pop. That's Michael Jackson. And I'll ask you the question, what do you think the king of pop has to offer us with regards to our personal growth, our professional potential? My answer is a lot, because that's one gentleman that went through a lot in his life and under a pretty keen microscope. With us today is Zack Greenburg, who tomorrow is coming out with a new book called Michael Jackson, Inc. And this looks at Michael Jackson's life through the lens of his business side, the business side of his career. But I think that there's going to be a lot of crossover between his personal and business life, as Zack's going to share with us. Just one note, we do have a live stream going here, so I'm going to be giving away a copy of Zack's book. Again, it's Michael Jackson, Inc. And for those of you who are on Twitter, why don't you use the hashtag Michael Jackson, Inc., I-N-C, Michael Jackson, Inc. That's where I'm going to be looking for the answer to the question to get that book. So I'll be trying to monitor it, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But right now, I'd like to introduce Zack. Zack, thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you very much for having me on.
So, Zack, I'll just start by asking you. Your last book was about Jay-Z, another pop icon. Can you talk a little about your journey from that book on Jay-Z to the Michael Jackson book? What brought you to this book?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty interesting process from one to the other. You know, when I finished the Jay-Z book, I think you know, I wanted to take on somebody who wasn't a step down, and you know, there aren't many places to go when you want to go up from Jay-Z. So you know, Michael Jackson was definitely a fit for that criteria. But I think the main reason I picked Michael Jackson as the subject of my next book is that I had been covering the business of music for Forbes for a few years already when I got the Jay-Z book deal. And you know, even as I was writing, or I would say right after I finished the Jay-Z book, but you know, before that as well, I had been covering the business of Michael Jackson, you know, as part of my music coverage. And as time went on, I really started to notice the incredible amount of money that his estate was pulling in after he died. And, you know, I mean, just mind-boggling sums. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars a year sometimes, and over $100 million every full year since he died. And, you know, I started to think, you know, that this isn't just a matter of, you know, of intelligently, you know, making the most of sort of the opportunities to put out, you know, documentaries and Cirque du Soleil shows after his death. This was a product of the foundations of the platform that he built during his life. You know, and the more I kind of dug into it, I began to kind of formulate this idea that Michael Jackson was somebody who, you know, despite the fact that a lot of people thought of him as, you know, kind of terrible with money, you know, toward the end of his life, and, you know, to be fair, he certainly had his struggles. He was revolutionary in business, just as he was in music, and particularly in the 80s and 90s when he made some of his biggest and best deals in his lifetime. So, I mean, if you look at some of the deals there, they really kind of paved the way for a new breed of entrepreneurial mogul musician, you know, guys like Jay-Z and Diddy.
Okay. So what I want you to try to zoom in on during this interview is to talk a little about what you came away with the personal as it opposes the professional in his life. Okay. So you took it along a timeline And I'm curious if there were certain points in his career where you took note of either, he was having outrageous success because of certain things that he was doing personally, or vice versa, he had influences or management that came into his sphere of influence that really, turned on the heat for his career. What is your feeling about that?
I think for Michael Jackson growing up, there was not really any separation between his personal life and his work life. His dad rehearsed them nonstop. They were constantly on the road, going around, the area around Gary, Indiana, where he and his brothers grew up. And they didn't really have a typical childhood. It was just kind of work, work, work all the time. But I think in a way that's informs a lot of his personality going forward. I think that he's somebody who is a perfectionist, and every album throughout his life, it seemed like it was never good enough for him, and he was constantly tweaking and making changes up until the very end. I think that's partially a product of the fact that growing up, there wasn't much separation between his work life and his personal life, and they were just so intertwined. I think that in part led to this incredible work ethic that he had.
Right. Now, do you think what influence was the greatest that made him such a perfectionist?
I think that there are a couple different influences in there. On the one hand, there's his dad, who I'm not sure I would say he was a perfectionist or not, but he was a really harsh first boss for Michael, and that was not a good thing. I think certainly in the short term, it's very well chronicled that Joseph was pretty brutal with his kids, and he would beat his kids. And I interviewed him for the book, and I said, "Why did you beat your kids?" And he said, "Well, that's what everybody else was doing at the time." So, obviously, that's not a tactic to be condoned. But, I think that, Joe was very intent on having his kids be out there and be on the road and, and continue to develop their careers. And so I think that intensity, regardless of the fact that it was sort of ill-advised in many ways and executed in ways that were not positive. There was an intensity there that Joe had. I think that Michael picked up. But I think probably his most significant early mentor on the business side, and on the music side too, was Berry Gordy. Berry Gordy, of course, chief of Motown Records, and he was really one of the most incredible entrepreneurs of his generation in the music business or in any other business. And Michael grew up in his kind of middle childhood with Berry Gordy, and working alongside Berry Gordy in the studio, and being around him quite a lot. Berry Gordy really took Michael and his brothers under his wing, particularly when they moved out to Los Angeles, and he really became sort of like a second father. And I interviewed him a lot for the book as well. And one of the things that he said is that Michael just followed him around all the time and was constantly watching him and just absorbing like a sponge. And Barry thinks that part of Michael Jackson's business mind grew out of that exposure through some kind of osmosis, where he would be, Barry would be in the studio doing a recording session with Michael and his brothers, but then he might stop to take a call and work out some kind of business deal, and Michael would be there watching and listening and kind of picking up these little things about the business that Barry was very openly sort of talking about. So, I think that was one of the things that really stuck with Michael from an early age and influenced him going forward.
What when you think of the rest of the Jackson family, Did you have the opportunity to interview any of the other siblings, or even people close to the family who talked about the different personalities within the family? I'm kind of curious whether Michael was very unique in the ethic that he came out, because obviously professionally he was the one that really just catapulted.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Joe definitely tried to instill that attitude in all the brothers, and I did talk to some of the other brothers as well briefly for my research. But I think that obviously Michael was the one who, for whatever reason, just kind of took it and ran with it even further than everybody else did. I think that's just kind of how it turned out.
Sure, sure. So, what were from the people that you interviewed? What were some of the most unique stories, or just the people who you spoke to that you felt just had a really good idea of the man, Michael Jackson?
Definitely Berry Gordy was, obviously had a great knowledge of Michael and what he was like and who he was and what he achieved and kind of what was at his core. There were some other great sources. Walter Yetnikoff, who was sort of Michael's next label boss. He was the head of CBS Records during the Thriller years, and he's a real character. I mean, he's really one of these kind of old school record label guys. Who was spending most of the 1980s focused on booze and drugs and women, but was actually a really brilliant guy and had some great insights, into Michael and his growth and his kind of way of operating both as an artist and as a businessman. And one of the things that Walter pointed out was that Michael was obsessed with not just making the most incredible music that he could, but he wanted it to do well. I mean, he wanted it to be recognized not just critically, but on the charts as well. That was really important to him. And he would call, this is when Thriller came out, he would call Walter at all hours of the night and ask him, where's the record on the charts? How's it selling? How's it doing? He was that focused on it because, it wasn't just, I want this to be the best, but I want it to be the best selling. I want it to be incontrovertible. I want there to be proof that this was the best by any metric that we can judge. And he was certainly willing to go to great lengths to get that information. But I ended up talking to over 100 people for the book. As I mentioned, members of his immediate and extended family. Walter Yetnikoff, Berry Gordy, and a lot of people from that era, but also some of the musicians who crossed paths with him later in his career, from people who you might expect, like Teddy Riley, who works with him in the studio, and Rodney Jerkins, likewise, to people who maybe I think a lot of the audience might not know. He was working on music with Swiss Beats. He had traded some ideas with Pharrell. He had a couple of conversations with Nas, and those are all guys who gave me interesting kind of little anecdotes about MJ. Not to mention, in the 80s, Sheryl Crow, who toured with him on the Bad Tour, gave me some perspective of what it was like to be his backup singer, which is what she was at the time. John Bon Jovi happened to have encountered MJ at in a hotel in Japan and gave a really fascinating anecdote there. So some of these names basically are just entertainers who I've encountered in my work for Forbes, and when I would interview them, I would ask them, I'd tell them I was writing a Michael Jackson book, and pretty much without fail, they all had some kind of interesting thing to say about MJ or some kind of encounter or revealing anecdote that they had. And it was really cool to be able to include that.
Why don't you share one or two of the ones that that really stuck out for you? Either
Sure.
Funny ones or just totally off the wall things like that. What are the funny ones that you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny in sort of a bittersweet way, but I think the John Bon Jovi anecdote is a great one. He told me that in I guess it was 1988, he was in Japan, in Tokyo, and he and his band were touring Slippery When Wet, and Michael Jackson was touring Bad, and they were both playing they're both playing shows in Tokyo. I think MJ was at the big stadium and Bon Jovi was at the smaller stadium. And they happened to be staying in the same hotel, and Bon Jovi got a call from Michael Jackson's manager at the time, Frank DeLeo, who said, "Hey, you want to come up and meet Mike?" And so Bon Jovi said, "Yeah, sure, would love to." So he and the band go up to the top floor of the hotel, off to this entire gigantic suite that Michael had reserved, and Frank DeLeo, the manager, is kind of ushering them up. He's this kind of fire plug of a man. He's sort of he was actually cast as a mobster in I think it was Goodfellas. So he's got this kind of mobster aesthetic to him, and he's puffing a cigar. He sort of extinguishes it before knocking on MJ's door, and slicks his hair back, and he opens the door, and so they sit there, and Michael's not there yet, and they wait, and Bon Jovi's looking around, and Michael had arranged for the entire suite to be converted into this giant dance studio, essentially. He had all the carpeting ripped up and put this temporary wood floor on the ground so that he could practice his dance moves. This is like on a Friday or Saturday night, and only, I don't know how long he was in Japan, but probably not long enough that you would necessarily need to do that. But anyway, so they're waiting around, waiting for MJ, and finally he comes out, and he's wearing some fantastic outfit from the Bad tour with it's all black leather and buckles, and really makes an entrance, and so he chats with Bon Jovi and the guys, and after a while they say, "Hey Mike, well we're gonna go out, but do you wanna get together later and party?" And he's sort of like, "Oh sure, let's see how it goes." And so Bon Jovi and them go off, and they come back, and they call DeLeo. They tell him they're back. They're ready to hang out. They're waiting, and they're just partying in their room and having a ball. And finally they hear a knock on the door, and it's Bubbles the Chimp with no MJ. And Michael had basically sent down the Chimp to be his ambassador because he was wanting to stay in his room and practice his dance moves, just to get it to be totally perfect for his next show. And Bon Jovi told me that pretty much they said, "All right, well, we're rock stars, and it's the late 1980s, and we're going to do what rock stars in the late 1980s should do. We're just going to trash this hotel room and get drunk with the Chimp." And they did, and they left the hotel the next day and blamed all the damage on the Chimp, and never got to hang out with Michael. But it's kind of bittersweet because it's kind of funny story about Bubbles, but it's also, there you have Michael Jackson with an opportunity to hang out with one of his peers, but he was so focused on his craft that he just didn't do it. He was up in his room practicing. So that was I think one of my favorite anecdotes that I got from the book.
Yeah, I'll ask you for one more, but first, just going to let everybody know I'm talking with Zack Greenburg, and the new book is Michael Jackson, Inc. And in a few minutes, I'm going to be asking the question for the book giveaway. So anybody who's listening right now, just send a tweet to Dig Deep Grow at Dig Deep Grow. The first tweet that comes through with the answer to the question will get the book, and we'll arrange to get that to you. So anyway, Zack, you mentioned about his work, MJ's work ethic. Sorry. Tell me, when Thriller came out, my understanding of reading a little in the book is that after Thriller, he was obsessed with trying to beat his success with that album, which, as we all know, it never happened. So talk a little about your understanding of what happened with MJ. because of that perfectionist attitude and how that might have affected his future endeavors after Thriller.
Yeah, I think that after Thriller, Michael just became fixated on beating Thriller. It's that same perfectionist impulse that caused him to, want to stay late in his hotel room and practice those dance moves. He wanted everything to be the best possible, and that meant having every subsequent product or work that he put out be that much better than whatever had come before. And Thriller presented quite a problem because it was the best-selling album of all time, and by definition, it's almost impossible to beat that. And I think that as time went on, and he continued to put out really good music that was very well received generally. I mean, I think there were bad reviews here and there, but I mean, he was still putting out hits and was generally still at the peak of his game, top of the charts, all that kind of stuff. All of his subsequent albums did really well. If you look at Bad and Dangerous and so on, I mean, we're talking tens of millions of copies each time around, but not 100 million copies, that Thriller did worldwide. So I think, with each successive album, it became, even more and more of a struggle for him that he wasn't able to top Thriller in terms of making something that was better than Thriller, making his next Thriller. And I think that ate at him a little bit, and I think that was a part of the reason why he continued to sort of ramp up his spending to the point where I guess it was on Invincible, it was something like $30 or $40 million spent on recording it, which is about the GDP of Tuvalu. That's actually true. I looked that up. So just these kind of mind-boggling sums in an attempt to top this incredible work that he's made. So I think there's a great quote in here from 50 Cent, who really, I think, identifies with MJ in a lot of ways, because 50 Cent came in and made Get Rich or Die Trying, and then everybody was constantly holding him up to that standard. And it's tough when you're constantly measured against yourself. So the quote that 50 Cent gave me was, "They put you up against yourself. If they give you an opponent, you can analyze and figure out their weaknesses and beat them. But if it's yourself, how do you win? How do you top that?" And I think that's pretty apt. I think that's something that MJ certainly had to deal with, as his career went on.
So at what point in his career, I mean, you mentioned that he had a lot of albums after Thriller that did very well, but there was a point where he really became much more self-destructive. Was there a point that, in your interviews and talking with various people, that it became clear that there was a turning point?
I mean, certainly the allegations in '93 really took their toll on him. He also struggled with painkillers, throughout the latter portion of his life, which, obviously took their toll. And he had, a lot of people around him who were not kind of part of his original team that had, been part of all of the great stuff that happened in the '80s, all these great deals that he did. And, with this kind of rotating cast, there was nobody who could say no, who felt empowered to say no. And I think all these things kind of contributed to his decline. But I think that's what obscures some of these deals that he made particularly in the mid-late '80s and early '90s that really kind of changed the game. And that's kind of what I tried to bring back to the surface throughout the book.
Right. Okay. So you brought up an interesting point about, as a businessman, MJ made a lot of decisions against the best advice of various people, who in his management team. So the question I have is, on his own, was he more destructive, or was he actually a genius and he followed his instincts with regards to the music and the business?
Well, look, I think any good businessman or woman needs you know, needs somebody to bounce their ideas off of, and somebody to say, hey, I think this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, what have you. And if I think anybody who is intelligent at doing business will seek a number of opinions, and may continue, even if their advisors say don't do that, might decide to do it anyway, or maybe they'll say, oh well, no, you're right, that's a good point, I hadn't thought of that. In the case of, for example, buying the Sony ATV catalog, which is probably, I would say it's the best business move that Michael Jackson made, maybe the best business move that any musician made, over the past few decades, maybe ever.
And I should say, I think it was $47 million he bought it for. How much was it?
Yeah, he bought the catalog for $47.5 million. That's the ATV catalog that contains most of the greatest hits by the Beatles and some other good stuff. And most of his advisors at the time said that was just an outrageous amount of money and that he shouldn't go for it. It was just too much. And it's another nice story in there. During that meeting where many of his advisors were telling him to back off, he scribbled a note on the back of a financial statement, and he passed it under the table to his lawyer, John Branca, who's now the co-executor of the estate. And the note said, actually I have it in the in the back of the book, there's a photocopy of it, but it says let's not bargain, this is my catalog, in all caps. And he was really adamant about it, and I think that was a case of where he was right to sort of overrule his investment committee, if you will.
And so what's it worth now? What's that catalog worth now?
He later merged it, it was 10 years later, he merged it with Sony's catalog. They paid him $115 million and gave him a half stake in the new venture, Sony ATV, which is now worth about $2 billion. So I would say that he made a good call in going ahead with that one.
Yeah, that was a good one. All right, so hey everybody, the book is Michael Jackson Inc., and we're talking with Zack Greenburg. Right now I'm going to go ahead and pop the question. Anybody who can tweet the answer to @DigDeepGrow is going to get that book. So here's the question. As a solo artist, what was the year that Michael Jackson had his first #1 Billboard Top 100 single? His first Billboard Top 100 single. What was the year? Okay, so that's the question. We'll let you ruminate on that, or go Google it, whatever. So Zack, I'm gonna come back to the musicians that you interviewed who had played with Michael, and can you talk a little about whether what was the feeling among people who actually worked with him? Did they feel that he was a taskmaster? He was a great guy to work with. What was the feedback you got there?
I think that their takeaway in general was that he was a guy who just cared so much about everything he did and was a perfectionist, and even to other perfectionists, he would hold them to his exacting standards. And for example, I had a brief chat with Pharrell, and I was talking about MJ, and he said that he had actually been talking with MJ about working together, and it sent over a few tracks, and MJ was basically like, they're all right, but you got to keep working on that. Like go back to the drawing board there. And Pharrell said that really inspired him to kind of up his game even more, and look where he is today. So I think he definitely had that kind of influence on a lot of people.
Okay. Now, as you mentioned, one of the most intriguing things to you was the fact that the family was able to basically, bring the Michael Jackson empire out of the ashes. Talk a little about who was behind that, how was it so successful? What were some of the machinery there?
Sure. So it wasn't really the family; it was the executors of the estate who, had been kind of tasked with managing the finances of Michael Jackson Inc. After his death, and that included John Branca, his on and off again lawyer, but on for most of the '80s and pretty much the whole 1980s and then a little bit here and there in the '90s, and then again at the very end. And John McClane, who's another mover shaker in the music business, who had known the Jackson family for ages and had worked with Janet and Michael throughout his career on and off again. So those were two people who were pretty familiar with his business empire and what to do with it. But basically what happened was when he died, there were hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, but there were even more in the way of assets. So they had to figure out what to do, whether they were going to try to sell off these huge assets, the stake in Sony ATV, Michael's own publishing catalog, which he retained the rights to, a lot of, a warehouse full of stuff that's still sitting out there somewhere in California with cars and paintings and things like that. And ultimately what they elected to do was to try to raise a lot of money through various deals, pay off the debts that were about to come due, refinance some of the longer term ones into more traditional business loans. The interest rates had gotten out of control, so they were able to what they were able to do was basically get these giant deals. One from Sony for the for a 10-year, 10-project, $250 million record deal to put out Michael Jackson-related recordings, both unreleased and sort of compilation albums, going forward. Then also the This Is It documentary concert film ended up grossing, I think it was at the box office over $250 million, and a bunch of other projects that they were able to kind of get those deals signed pretty quickly, so that they had the cash flow to be able to pay off, the more pressing debts and retain the big assets, which they've done. So, Sony ATV is still owned half by the Michael Jackson estate and will be passed along to his heirs, to his children, and some of the proceeds will go to charity as soon as all the last remaining legal claims work their way through the system and things like that. So it's been a pretty remarkable business story, one that I've been following for Forbes for quite some time, just to see how, over the past 5 years, Michael Jackson has earned $750 million, and it's more than any solo act, living solo act, has made over that period of time. So just kind of a phenomenal amount of wealth generated, and really, I think, a testament to the foundations that MJ built during his lifetime.
Yeah, I think that in some regards, just for the longevity after death, we'll say, I think of Elvis a little bit with regards to how long his thing has gone on. Did you draw any parallels or think a little about the financial legacy that each of these guys had, or comparing them in any way?
Between Elvis and MJ, you mean?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was a very different kind of mindset, I think, for the two of them. Elvis was somebody who signed away half of his earnings to his manager, and didn't really write his own songs, and he was not necessarily so in control of his finances. And to be fair, obviously, MJ had his struggles later on in life, but if you look at Elvis in his prime versus MJ in his prime, I mean, MJ wasn't getting kind of swindled out of half of his earnings by his management team. He was the one saying, telling them, no, you're wrong, I want to buy this Beatles catalog.
Right.
It was a very different approach, between the two. But obviously there's similarities there, and I know that MJ, really was fascinated by Elvis in many ways, and looked up to him in many ways, and I think one of the things that he really wanted to do was to get into film, and like Elvis did, and to have a career for himself on both sides of the camera. And he has been. I mean, if you kind of go and look back, obviously he was. Well, I don't know about obvious, but to me it's obvious. He was in The Wiz, which is a musical film adaptation of Wizard of Oz, and it's set in New York instead of Kansas and Oz, and that was kind of his debut. And I think that opened his eyes to the potential of Hollywood. And then in the late '80s, he starred in Captain EO, which was a Disney theme parks only short film that was about 18 minutes long, and it was sort of like a space opera a la Star Wars, wherein Michael Jackson led a ragtag band of creatures around in an attempt to save a planet from an evil queen, and then sort of dance them to death at the end of it. And that was something that I think was a pretty big deal for him, to finally be in a starring role, and to get a lot of recognition, and to work with George Lucas, who was a producer on it, and Francis Ford Coppola, who directed it. And I think for him that was going to be the entree into like a full-on acting career. And in the early '90s, he had a few things in development, but the allegations in 1993 just completely derailed the ambitions that he had on the big screen.
Right. Okay. Hey, so we got a couple of minutes left. I have two questions that I want to finish up with, and one is that anecdote, another anecdote, from the stories that you had heard. But the first one is, what do you think was the most surprising element in the book for you? The discovery or part of the book that you covered, just the most surprising to you.
If I had to pick one kind of snippet that really shocked me, I think it was the amount of money that he was guaranteed for his LA Gear sneaker deal in 1990 was $20 million, and at the time that was $2 million more than Michael Jordan was guaranteed for his sneaker deal with Nike. So, I mean, obviously it worked out better for Michael Jordan than it did for Michael Jackson, and the Michael Jackson shoes didn't do very well. Michael Jordan's shoes, of course, did extremely well and continue to. But the fact that he was at that level, where he was able to get a guarantee on par with Michael Jordan, I think just says everything you need to know. And what he really did was kind of open the door for, and this is another 50 Cent quote, he said, Michael opened the door for an area that had previously been reserved for professional athletes. And then you see down the line guys like 50 Cent and Jay-Z going ahead and making their own shoe lines and clothing lines. It's another thing that Michael did that wasn't quite as successful as, say, Jay-Z or Diddy or 50 Cent, but kind of opened people's eyes to that possibility, and kind of changed the paradigm for monetizing fame.
Right, definitely a trailblazer with regards to that. So, can you think of another story that that comes to mind? Just talking with interviewing various people.
Oh man, I mean those were those are, I think, some of the great nuggets of information out there. I mean, the whole thing is packed, of course, with other ones, but I think that I think those are my favorites. I mean, let me think. I think.
Well, maybe I could put it another way and say, of the 100 people that you interviewed, what stood out to you as the best interview that you had?
I gotta say Walter Yetnikoff was really up there. I mean, he's somebody who is just totally hilarious, and the whole time I was interviewing him, he was we were having lunch, and he's like, sort of like your Jewish grandfather. And he's like, look at you, your skin and bones. Are you gonna eat that? Why are you taking so long to eat? But then he'd talk, with this great kind of foul-mouthed anecdote telling of that, that only a guy who's been a record executive in the 1980s can, talking about you know, how he was constantly threatening to sue, you know, this person or that person, and you know, another one. The anecdote that I thought of initially, and why I couldn't say it, is because it was a Walter Yetnikoff anecdote, and it's full of expletives. So I'm not sure what what your policy is on that, but it's in chapter 5.
Well, we're going to let everybody.
That was my other favorite one that I haven't mentioned yet.
All right. Well, maybe we'll leave that as a secret for people to look up.
Yeah.
So we're at the close of the interview. Let me ask you, where can people go to? You know, obviously, you can go to Amazon or any major bookseller to get the book, Michael Jackson Inc. Do you have any place on the web people can go check it out?
Yeah, if you need the quick link to Amazon, just go to mjinc.co, and that'll take you right to the Amazon page.
Cool.
Express train.
Right. As we finish, let me ask you, what do you got coming next? This is early, but you're just launching your book.
Oh man, well, let's just say if I get a call from Dr. Dre or Diddy, I'll have my ears open.
That sounds great. Well, Zack Greenburg, thanks for coming on today. Really lively conversation, and I appreciate your sharing a lot about the book today.
You bet. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Take care now.
You too.
Thank you.